Because Ryan and his wife had a beautiful baby girl, this is the weekend in which Duke beating Notre Dame was not the most beautiful thing to happen in the world. So it's time to wake up, college football! Welcome to Wake Up College Football. Week 4 is officially in the books. And as you can see, to my right, this beautiful, unshaven man is Bill Connolly, SB Nation's own Bill Connolly, Football Study Hall, Football Outsiders. Podcast ain't played nobody. He literally never sleeps. So, Bill, welcome. Thank you for filling in. And I think we have a week to discuss in which we can sort of figure out if teams are for real.
Right. That seemed to be the general gist of this week was, this is kind of a whatever cream from the crop, whichever silly little cliche you want to use there to figure out who's actually for real and who has just been faking it for a few weeks or just barely getting by. And I think we got a pretty good sense of certain teams that are absolutely positioned well moving into October, and others who just pretty much died.
Is that a great way of saying North Texas, UMass, and Kentucky may not be the best way to judge the Florida Gators now?
That was a weird game because, the first half was everything I expected to see from Florida and even less than I expected to see from Tennessee. And then it just flipped. And, I might have to go back and kind of watch what happened in about the third quarter there to figure it out for sure. But yeah, that was definitely kind of two games in one, and powered Tennessee though. The one thing it's been man-made, but they've forced themselves to overcome adversity this year early in the year, and then they've done it. So that power to them. Georgia is going to be a different test next week. Georgia has its own issues at the moment, but it will be a different kind of road test and all that. But this was the Tennessee team in the second half that we kind of expected to see a lot of this year, and we hadn't hardly seen it at all.
So a reverse Ole Miss is what Tennessee is at this
Pretty
point.
much.
They're a reverse
Right.
Ole Miss.
If you could flip those rosters at halftime, everything's great.
Yeah, no, they would make up a super team. So are you a believer now in any more of a significant sense with what Tennessee and Josh Dobbs, particularly in the second half, was able to do against what we still think is a talented Florida defense?
Yeah, I think just overall, I think that Josh Dobbs being able to actually pass a little bit on Florida was the one thing I didn't expect to see, and we saw it. So who knows now what could happen with that team if they can actually pass a little bit though, and maybe Florida just fell asleep and just completely took him for granted. But if they can actually pass moving forward, that's great. I mean, at that point they've really got a nice array of options to use here. But we'll see if they can do it twice. Dobbs hasn't been able to throw like that pretty much all year, and now he has to do it again and again and again.
All right, let's stick with the theme of SEC passing because it doesn't really exist for Texas A&M in a significant way. And the Aggies are really good, and it's because of Keith Ford and Travion Williams and an offensive line on the ground and an excellent defense. Is that something that we should have expected coming into the season, and how significant is it after week 4?
Yeah, I think the thing with A&M heading into this season was that they actually had experience and maturity for the first time in about 4 years. And I think what we're seeing now is how that can play out in real life. And this is a team that has maybe fewer options, less upside than other A&M teams have had recently, but they've got a level of experience they didn't have. They don't panic. Having a very good defensive line that was able to control things against Arkansas's offensive line, that's very impressive. And so, they've got things going for them, and they've got nice senior leadership for the first time in forever, and that's a very good thing. And we've seen how that's played out. Upside's great, but you got to meet it, and they haven't been meeting it. So, I think A&M's in kind of an interesting place. Now, if you'll hold on for a second, I have to deal with a child.
Please do. No, that's good. It was great to see what Arkansas was not able to do against Texas A&M, if you are an Aggie fan, just because to see those goal line stands, to see especially the interior of that Aggie defensive line, love you, Daylon Mack, do at the goal line, and to just shut down Arkansas, an Arkansas team that has run all over Texas A&M. There's Bill. Just talking about how good Texas A&M's defensive line was with the goal line stands and what it meant to do it against Arkansas, who's run all over Texas A&M. To what degree do you think the gap is now closing between Texas A&M and the top of the conference?
Well, I mean, at the top of there's Alabama and the rest of the conference.
Correct.
I mean, Alabama's got all the upside that A&M doesn't have, or a lot more of it at least, and then they also have a decent amount of experience too. So it's really hard to compare anybody to Alabama. But in terms of if you're looking at number 2, they do have the stability that Ole Miss lacks.
Yep.
They've got they're actually kind of a weird version of LSU. They might have a little more offensive upside at this point, but and health at this point. But the defense is very comparable to LSU's, which is not something we really expected to ever say.
Right.
And so maybe just that combination of good defense and minimal mistakes on offense and decent experience, maybe that is enough to get them past what is an amazingly volatile, super fun Ole Miss team. Fun isn't always good, though. I think we've learned that from Ole Miss this year.
This is fair. And because people just want to enjoy their Sunday mornings, whether they're drinking coffee and just happy that the sun is out, we're just not going to talk about LSU Auburn. It's just, there's no reason to bring that black cloud of a game into an otherwise fun college football morning. So let's just move on.
Nothing like saying for the last 2 minutes straight, this is stupid. This is stupid. Just over and over and over again. And it was. And then it ended.
This is true. Let's go to the Big Ten, because there was the conference with the other grouping of interesting games. Michigan State hosted Wisconsin. I think the majority of people going into this game figured that coming off of a Notre Dame win that we at the time assumed was impressive, maybe less so now after yesterday, that Michigan State should be able to handle Wisconsin with their apparently backup quarterback in Alex Hornibrook at home. And they did no such thing. What is the huge takeaway from this game, if there is one, as it relates to what now looks like a really good Wisconsin team with 2 top 10 victories on the early schedule?
Right. The defense that Wisconsin is playing, they lose Aranda and they get better somehow. I don't think anybody really expected them. But their level of defense has been awesome. And, I think, having some injuries in the backfield, having to shuffle running backs, slowed them down a little bit offensively last week against Georgia State. But even against Georgia State, they created a scoring chance basically every time they had the ball. They just managed to blow it a lot. It was one of those football is weird games that they still managed to win. So I mean, this looks like a hardcore Big Ten West caliber team here. They play really strong defense. They can control the field. They can run the ball pretty well. The quarterback situation was kind of weird, and maybe they stumbled into a heck of an answer yesterday with that. But I think Wisconsin winning this game wasn't necessarily the surprise. Winning it by 24 in East Lansing was nobody could have really anticipated that one, especially after last week.
Now, the Badgers have both Michigan and Ohio State on their schedule. I guess which of those teams should scare Wisconsin more, and which of those teams should be more scared by Wisconsin?
Well, I think the answer to both is Ohio State, actually, because Ohio State clearly, I mean, the upside we've seen through 3 weeks, 4 weeks now, I guess, the upside Ohio State has shown has been ridiculous. And considering how young they are, that wasn't a given that they would be able to kind of hit that level, even with Urban Meyer as their head coach. But they are still a young team, and at some point this year, they are going to get tripped up in kind of the same way, not necessarily losing, but they're going to stumble in kind of the same way that they stumbled against Michigan State last year. The offense is going to kind of lose its efficiency a little bit. Those third down passes aren't going to actually connect. They're going to find themselves in kind of a defensive slog to a degree. And if that happens against Wisconsin, Wisconsin does seem like a very mature, sturdy, physical team that could really make Ohio State nervous heading into the fourth quarter. Now, but with the upside Ohio State has, I mean, that's it. Anytime Ohio State is really kind of dialed in, they're going to win their game. So
if I can extrapolate, you feel that Michigan is more stumble-proof at this point, the fact that there are more upperclassmen, the fact that they do have an experienced coaching staff with these players, that they are able, you think they'll be able to weather down weeks in a more significant way than Ohio State?
I would say so. That's kind of what experience brings to the table. I mean, I was just saying the same thing with A&M, but that's I think that's what Michigan has right now. Maybe not quite as much upside as Ohio State, because I'm not sure anybody outside of Alabama has the upside of Ohio State. But yeah, I think they have a certain level of maturity that'll allow them to get through really tight games. In Ohio State, I just think there are a couple stumbles on the way for them, and if it happens against Rutgers, they're fine. If it happens against Michigan or Michigan State or Wisconsin, they're not.
What was the most significant thing, if anything, we learned from Michigan against Penn State yesterday, especially with how they came out so quickly, which is not what Michigan has always done against better teams?
Right. Right. I mean, I think that's it. They absolutely handle their business as quickly as possible. And Penn State's got to win one of these at some point. James Franklin really needs to. He's not doing terribly, but he needs a win. He needs a big win, and they made sure that there was absolutely no hope in that whatsoever from the start. I mean, this is a very strong Michigan team. Some of the other teams that were projected pretty highly, LSU, for example, it took a leap of faith with some of these teams because we haven't necessarily seen that elite level of play from year to year. The faith is at least paid off with Michigan, I think. This is a very, very good football team.
Is there a case at this point in the Big 12, as we've talked about an SEC that has one team at the top, but two or three teams that at least have shown an ability to play at a very high level? The Big 10, same goes for that conference with those three teams right now, and it's not wise to count out Michigan State after just one loss, and they fix things. But the Big 12 at this point appears to be very middle-heavy. Is there a case for it being top-heavy other than Baylor? At this point, is there confidence from you?
Well, there's not a lot of confidence for sure, but I mean, I do think, obviously Oklahoma's not going to play a role in the playoff at this point, but I think that's still a strong. I mean, you lose to Houston. You lose to Houston in a game that was basically decided by a kick six. I mean, that was almost the margin there. From a stat perspective, I mean, the yardage and whatnot, it was all pretty much equal. And that field goal they were attempting would have given them the lead, and then suddenly they were down 9 and they lost by, I think, 10. So, I mean, that was basically kind of a coin toss game that they came up short on. And then being inferior to Ohio State might not be the worst thing in the world. That might not be incredibly damning, overall. So we could find out soon that OU is still a top 10 or 15 caliber team, and that they're able to, go 10-2 and give the conference a good showing in whatever bowl they end up in. So that's not off the table. But if we're talking more playoff specific, obviously now it's Baylor, which is its own set of awkward issues overall. But I mean, Baylor looked like Baylor yesterday. They stumbled at times on offense, but and the third down conversions they were allowing to Oklahoma State was really confusing considering how pretty good they were on first and second down.
Right.
But I mean, that's still a team with a lot of potential, and they could make this thing kind of awkward if they continue to win.
To what degree are they similar to Baylor teams that have looked dominant, at least for the first 2/3 of the season these past couple years? We saw Katie Cannon go down, and Ish Zamora really stepped up. Both teams in this game, Oklahoma State and Baylor, were not really able to run the ball with any significance. Seth Russell was able to run it a bit. But that's been a thing we've seen from Baylor, that they're especially dangerous when they're able to run the ball. And they haven't been.
Right, yeah. They're not. This isn't 10 out of 10. This isn't, the best Baylor offense.
Right.
But really good. And Seth Russell's really good, and they do have depth in the receiving core. The running game is a concern. I'm not really sure what to think about either their run offense or Oklahoma State's run defense. I know what to think about Oklahoma State's run offense. It hasn't been very good for a couple of years now, but this isn't the best Baylor team, but it's a Baylor team good enough to threaten to go about 11-1 or so and win the conference. So we'll see.
Which team in the conference do you think is best suited? I guess if it's a conversation between Texas, TCU, OU, who is best suited to take advantage of a Baylor team that isn't quite where it's been these past couple seasons?
Well, I mean, Texas is. I don't know if how well suited they are, but I can't wait for that game. That's going to be. There are about 118 storylines for that game, but honestly, I probably lean towards OU just because they are probably the most overall talented and high upside team in the conference besides Baylor. So that that probably sets them up pretty well overall. Texas, though, TCU especially. Is really hard to figure out right now because for the first 3 weeks of the season or whatever, their offense looked just fine for the most part, and their defense showed major flaws. Then against SMU the other night, their offense stumbles repeatedly. Their defense looks fine. So, yeah, I don't think we have the complete picture on TCU yet.
All right, we'll go to a conference that certainly at the moment looks extraordinarily top-heavy in the ACC. Clemson, Florida State, and Louisville, with Florida State laying waste to what we think is a pretty good USF team yesterday. Clemson showing things defensively, at least Thursday night. I don't think they played great offense for 4 quarters against Georgia Tech. And Louisville, once again, even with some sort of stumbles against Marshall. I think, what did Lamar Jackson had 7 touchdowns in like a weird week? Yeah. So, first of all, is it only 3-headed? Is it a 3.5-headed monster with Miami still undefeated and having a nice one at App State under their belt? What is the hierarchy as it stands right now in the ACC?
Yeah, I mean, I think depending on how Florida State continues to play with all the injuries they've dealt with, I mean, those are 3. They definitely have 3 top 10 caliber teams, but Miami is, at this point, at least top 15 caliber.
Yeah.
They have proven absolutely as much as they possibly could with the schedule they've had. Sometimes that means, you go through against lesser teams, although Appalachian State, we don't know how lesser they are.
True.
They kind of almost won in Knoxville to start the season. But generally speaking, I mean, clearly there was an athleticism difference there, and they handled their business. Now, sometimes that means that it's foreshadowing and you're going to look just as good against really talented teams, and they've got plenty of those coming up. And sometimes that just means that you're really good when you have an athleticism advantage, and when that advantage disappears, you don't really have a plan B. So Miami has plenty to prove, and their October schedule is road heavy and packed with opponents better than the ones they've faced so far. So we'll get our answers really quickly on Miami. But I've been really impressed. I was very impressed with how quickly they just subdued Appalachian State in a really weird kind of road environment. That was one of the most impressive performances of the year by any team for me so far.
Interesting. And as we go out west and talk about a weird road week, Stanford pulls it out last second after a pretty atrocious 3.92 quarters of offense. Washington survives in the desert on the road against an Arizona team that looked feisty for much of this game. And USC, in an always weird road environment, couldn't quite get there against Utah. So definitively, what are you most confident in as it relates to the Pac-12 sort of going into October?
Stanford.
Okay.
Okay, so I mean, number one, I think UCLA is pretty good.
Yeah.
And they're going to end up. That was a tough break for them to lose that game, because if they win, they're probably going to be favored in every single regular season game the rest of the way. Mm-hmm. They're staring at 11-1 and beat Stanford again, and maybe you're a playoff contender all of a sudden. That was a big game for UCLA to lose. But I think the fact that Stanford won, despite itself, mm-hmm. but Stanford did win. I think that's going to end up being a pretty good foreshadowing for them. I think they're a very good team, and the schedule's still pretty tricky, but at the very least, the Notre Dame game doesn't look quite as much of a landmine as it did maybe 3-4 weeks ago. So I think they've got a really good path, and I'd say I'm most confident in them. Washington, I've been confident in Washington. I know who I'm talking to here, but I've been confident in Washington. I think that's a team that last night was really confusing. Maybe it's just a Pac-12 after dark thing, because right. This defense has been ridiculous, and it was very good for most of last year. And if Jake Browning is suddenly passing really well and everything else, they've really got just about everything you want a team to have. And then last night the offense does pretty well. The defense gets lit up a little bit. So maybe that's a TCU kind of team right now where we just don't have the complete picture. But there's a ton of upside there. And overall though, you got to lean with Stanford, I think.
All right, fair enough. And we will go to, I guess, now one of the independent teams, not the independent team. And obviously we're talking about UMass almost beating Mississippi State. Now, I mean, we can talk about that game if you want. But before we do, Duke beat Notre Dame. Duke is not particularly good this year. They lost to a particularly underwhelming Northwestern team and a Wake team that's improving, but still Wake Forest. What do we now think about Notre Dame, and now even a conversation about them going to a bowl game?
Yeah, I mean, I could make a case for Duke having been a little bit unlucky against Northwestern and Wake, but that's not really relevant to this
Decent
discussion.
teams can survive that.
Right. I think, heading into this year, like the one question, and it was this big looming red flag. And with these things, you never really completely know if it's going to be an issue. But, the Brian Van Gorder thing, him using the word exotic a lot is a giant red flag for any college defensive coordinator, because it probably means he's used to pros and having like 60 hours a week to work with guys, and not, working with 19-year-olds 20 hours a week. It was the thing that made me the most nervous about projecting him in the top 10 to start the season. And then, right out of the gates with Texas, their defense gets blown up, but maybe that's just Texas. And then their defense gets blown up again, and then it gets blown up by Duke. And I think at this point you can definitively say, I mean, the offense had some turnovers as well, obviously, but that defense is just not nearly what it should be considering the talent or the general athleticism that they've got. And that's, they're going to have to win shootouts, and they'll still win some. I mean, I've got to figure they make a bowl, and they do okay this year, but that was a very jarring result yesterday.
Fair enough, and I don't think we saw Duke as spoilers for a season. But on the sort of theme of spoilers, something that's always fun is that secretly dangerous team. And now as we look across the country, and we've seen elements of quality, not necessarily complete teams. Like, we know Davis Webb is going to throw for 450 yards against everybody. They might not win, but they'll probably beat somebody they shouldn't. We know that Patrick Mahomes will probably do the same thing in the Big 12. We know that, has Minnesota lost? I don't think they have. We might have to start talking about Minnesota. I don't know. But across various conferences, who has shown enough that you think they're just going to beat a really good team because they do 1.2 things well enough?
Boy, my gut reaction there was Miami, because I do think I do trust their offense a good amount at this point, and they have a lot of opportunities to beat good teams. They've got some really good teams on the schedule coming up. So maybe that's the answer. Overall, I think the other gut answer here is Ole Miss, but they just blew their best two opportunities to get a big win. So maybe they have to wait till a bowl to do so. But Ole Miss is a very good example of a team that does a few things very, very, very well. And they have a couple blind spots that tripped them up against two of the better teams in the country. So I do think Ole Miss has a very, very high ceiling, even if they don't have that many chances to beat excellent teams anymore. They'll continue to win games, and maybe then in the bowl game they can take down a big team.
Yeah, I see Arizona State being one of those teams. And Texas is not a complete team, but Texas throws the ball well enough, and they can be balanced on offense to a point with two good big running backs, where it feels like when things are clicking, very few teams can put them away.
Right, and the Cal loss, obviously, that wasn't good, but at the same time, that was Cal, and they were going to score points, and it was a 2 time zone difference, and they had to, it was a weird kickoff time, I guess, sort of weird at least, and they had to, this is still a young team. It was just a weird test, and they didn't pass it, but that doesn't mean they're suddenly maybe not a top 40 team anymore. That's still probably a very good team that's going to look good plenty of times this year. It's just they might have a couple more hiccups to go too.
Fair enough, and I think that's all we got. I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about that we learned to a significant degree, or that is still a big question mark for you. Certainly there are a couple teams who haven't played huge games against good teams. Looking at Michigan at the moment, but their schedule's going to get pretty real soon. Are there lingering questions for you now that we're done with September?
Well, Nebraska, I'm still pretty curious about.
Fair.
I think that was a top 20 or 25 caliber team that has certainly done what they needed to do so far. They were kind of lucky to win that Oregon game, but that was still a win, and they're still undefeated. So that's, Nebraska-Wisconsin certainly now looms as a very interesting matchup. And now I'll give a little shout out to Barry Odom's Missouri Tigers. Drew Lock throwing for 400 yards in the first half against air, but still. They certainly have an identity now that's going to allow them to be.
Can they spoil somebody's season?
Right. Let's see. They got Derek Dooley fired in 2012. They got Will Muschamp fired in 2014. They play Les Miles next week. So. Oh
wow, Missouri Angel of Death. Wow, I didn't even think about. And now here we are. Okay. Are you satisfied with the steps forward they've taken under a new coach? Mizzou?
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're ready to beat LSU or anything, but
Sure.
they have an actual offensive identity. They know what they want to do with the ball, and they do it. They don't run the ball quite well enough yet, but I mean, after last year, you take any sort of gains you can find on offense, and obviously they have offensive gains. So yeah, you can't complain at this point. Hopefully they do take down a couple of Giants here at some point, but after last year just burned everything down offensively. It's nice to see yards and points again.
A team that won a major conference division last year, and both last year and this year kind of looked like garbage in week 1 and has gotten a little bit better each week and pulled out a nice win yesterday. North Carolina. North Carolina beat Pitt last minute, came back. I think they were down 10 or 13 in the fourth quarter. Came back. Ryan Switzer had a very nice game, and North Carolina actually got stops on defense. Is North Carolina at this point, I feel like they're in the zone between a spoiler and a really good team. I don't know what that means as Mitch Trubisky has gotten better, which he could have only done since week 1. What is your feeling about the Tar Heels as it relates to the rest of their schedule?
Well, they are improving, and I think that's the most important thing. Like right now, I can say that Miami's probably been the best team in the Coastal Division. Virginia Tech's probably been the second best, but North Carolina's probably been third best. And if they're rising, and if Miami turns out to not be quite as high upside against other teams with upside, then they could absolutely make a run at the division title. That was impressive because you think about Pitt. I mean, they don't pass the ball very well, but they run the ball very well, and they still have good defensive leadership. And so that seems like a team that should be able to hold on to a lead very, very well, and they couldn't. And North Carolina just kept coming at them and ended up making plays down the stretch. So power to them for that. That was impressive, and they are definitely a contender here heading into August for that division title.
Fair enough. And I should mention, Oregon lost. I know nobody realized it because Colorado is America's team and dangerous and actually legitimately decent right now. But they go to Autzen and they beat Oregon with a backup quarterback. I am in 80% panic mode as a fan of Chip Kelly Oregon teams and early Mark Helfrich Oregon teams. Is there any precedent for a team that has so many deficiencies defensively and offensively in terms of organization and consistency? Is there any reason for me to have hope about a sane October and November?
Sane or good? Because
watching Oregon and thinking,
good.
That's true. So sane as in okay, they'll beat respectable teams and not look horrendous against respectable teams.
Well, I think when you've got one good year, and again, I mean, the offense, I think part of our problem watching the offense is that we're used to basically perfection,
right.
Overall, I think the offense is not too much to worry about, but, heading into it was obvious, if they can just play competent defense, they're right there. They have not always played competent defense this year, and maybe that just takes some time. I don't know, but I do think this is a team that is not going to be sane the rest of this year. They will beat Washington or Stanford. They will lose to Washington State. This is going to be a really odd fall. But I mean, hey, as long as you win some of those games, it could be worse, I guess.
As long as you win, which is a huge as long as if. Okay, Bill.
A little bit of an issue at the moment.
A little bit of an issue. What's for breakfast? It's Wake Up College Football. Have you already eaten breakfast? Have you already fed your lovely daughter?
Daughter had waffles.
Good.
And apparently finished them 5 minutes into this show and decided to come say hi. But I tend to go with I'm a lunch guy. I'm a coffee for breakfast kind of guy.
Wow.
So. I mean, the coffee's good, though, so, I think that lives up to the show.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, Bill, thank you very much for your time, for filling in. Ryan will be back soon. I'm not sure when, but he will be back, and we will get back to all sorts of fun. But Bill is excellent. Do subscribe and listen to podcast Ain't Played Nobody on SB Nation. Go to Football Study Hall to read all of Bill's wonderful work, and, of course, on SB Nation's college football landing page. Thank you again to Bill very much. We will see you next week. Have a good one.